Hey, good evening, Amy. Welcome to this first
Hey,
podcast of our hangout on Agile India 2016 conference. Pretty excited to have you kick off the hangout series that we have here.
I'm thrilled to be here. I'm just really excited to share my perspective today and then when I come out to Bangalore in March. It'll be my
Cool.
first trip to India, and I feel like I have so much to learn.
So, Amy, this is your first trip, and I'm sure it's exciting. Let's kind of jump into some real meat here to show people what we have here coming their way. You have a PhD in behavioral neuroscience. You're an avid game designer. You're a community architect, and more recently, you've been a startup coach, and you've been helping some amazing startups. Kind of discover their true potential. How's the journey been so far?
It's awesome. I'm really enjoying my work. It's ramping up, and I feel like I'm really being able to have an impact on startups all over the world that I wasn't really able to a few years ago. So it's just amazing.
And we're hoping the same, that once you come here to India, you'll be able to inspire a whole bunch of startups here. And this is just amazing. Looking forward to that. Let's kind
I
of
can't wait.
Sorry, yeah. Let's quickly go back a bit in time and look at, what inspired you. I mean, you were probably one of the first people I know of, and maybe I could be wrong, but you're one of the first people I know of who actually brought the whole game design or game thinking, what is now more popular as gamification, into, software development and software design. So what inspired you to kind of start with the field of game design?
That's a great question. So I came out of science and engineering, and I was a software programmer and a scientist. And through that, I learned about user interface and I learned about building products at Sun Microsystems and at Apple and at Paramount Technology. And I first got into game design when I was working for Paramount Communications, the company who owns Star Trek and a lot of great brands. And they asked me, I was working for them as a designer, a new product designer, and they asked me to go to the Game Developers Conference back in the 90s when it was very small, as kind of a forward scout to find out more about what was happening with online gaming. And I went to this conference and I felt like I had found my people. I felt really comfortable there. I really liked how brilliant and really wacky and super imaginative people were. I felt like my systems engineering background really came into play in a way in game design that it hadn't as much in product design, because I have a lot of system background from science and engineering. And games are really systems, or more likely sets of interlocking systems that require a lot of balancing to work right. So I felt very comfortable in game design. I, at the time, didn't encounter sexism, certainly less than I had in other areas of tech. And I felt that I could really make a contribution as a user interface designer, as a system designer, and as a community designer, all of which were areas I developed. So I got inspired originally because of meeting other game designers and really falling in love with how they saw the world and how they approached bringing their products to life. And from there, I started working in the field. I got jobs as an interface designer and as a social systems designer, and then as a co-lead designer. I really worked my way up, working on teams, helping to bring lots of different games to life. And for me, you say I was one of the first people to blend gaming with product design. I've never really differentiated them because I was always working in both. There was never really a time in my career when I didn't have a game project I was working on and also an app or a website or a product. And I really found that app and web design had a lot to offer game design and vice versa. So part of my, I would say part of my brand, or part of what I brought as a designer to all my products, was an expansiveness that encompassed both. because it just seemed to end up with better design. And I think that game design and product design have so much in common. At the heart of it, it's all about creating a great design that makes people want to come back again and again and gives them a satisfying experience. The main thing that's different about a lot of game design is that it's really based around the concept of skill building. So a lot of what I'll be sharing in India for our game thinking workshop is how to get past the clutter and often the irrelevant clutter of points and badges and leaderboards and really get at the heart of creating an experience that makes your customers more awesome, that makes them better than before. That's really the heart of great game and great product design.
That's awesome. I think that kind of summarizes the key value of how we can blend the two things together. Now, let's kind of shift gears a little and kind of go from the past to the future, or rather the present. And tell us a little bit about, now you've been helping a lot of entrepreneurs kind of build awesome products. And what do you think are the typical challenges that entrepreneurs are running into these days?
Well, there's a lot of different ones. It kind of depends on how experienced the entrepreneurs are. And I work with everyone from first-time entrepreneurs to a lot of serial entrepreneurs. But I would say the number one challenge that cuts across those groups is finding real product market fit and finding it efficiently and effectively. Many entrepreneurs I work with come to me and they say, well, I think we've got product market fit, and it turns out they really don't for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they do, and that's a great place to be. But finding quicker, faster, more efficient ways to get real signals as to how close you are to building a product that really meets your market needs is super hard to do. And a lot of the coaching I do is around that as one of the foundational elements of doing great product design work or great game design work. So that whether the entrepreneur knows it or not, that's really a common challenge. Even for serial entrepreneurs, the big difference I see between serial entrepreneurs and first-time entrepreneurs is serial entrepreneurs know how important and hard it is. They still struggle with it, but they have an appreciation for how hard it is. So a lot of my clients are serial entrepreneurs. They come to me and they learn about my game thinking framework and they go, oh, okay, I get exactly why this is going to save me so much time. So they get it quickly. But some first timers do as well. So that's a big one. There's a couple of others. One is just the basic challenge of taking an expansive, compelling idea for a product or a service or a game, and then figuring out how to build a stripped down, high learning, minimum viable product that is the right thing to build. So how to build the right MVP to maximize learning. Many people I work with talk the talk, like they get it, they understand what a lean startup is, they understand what an MVP is, they understand why they would want to do it, and they buy into it. Actually doing it is hard. There's a lot of decisions to be made. And so many people struggle with that. I myself struggle with that every time I work with a client or work on my own projects. So that's pretty universal. And again, that's part of why I've devoted a lot of energy to specific step-by-step techniques that make that easier, or at least give you a roadmap to follow, because it's really hard. And then a related element that is just pervasive, and it doesn't stop even after you've shipped something and started to get closer to product market fit. A related challenge that every entrepreneur faces is how to filter all of the feedback coming at you about your product and your business. Who to listen to, who not to listen to. How to really, it's related to product market fit, because I work with a lot of people and, maybe they won a hackathon, or that, somebody, some kind soul gave them some seed money and didn't think too much about it. And they don't really know who to listen to, and they don't understand that that doesn't mean they found, a viable product for the market. So understanding who to listen to get product feedback, who to listen to get business feedback, and how to move along, really efficiently toward product market fit in a focused way, navigating all the feedback coming at you. That's a pervasive issue. And when I talk to clients I've worked with, months after we completed our project, a lot of times they'll say that's one of the things they really took from our work was a model for filtering feedback. And it can, as you can imagine, and I'd love to hear people's stories too, that can save you a lot of time. And it can also save you a lot of wasted effort building stuff that maybe your investors think are cool, but doesn't make sense for your market.
Absolutely. So I think if I were to summarize the points, basically finding the product market fit, this is a big one. I think this is where we all struggle. And once we've kind of got an idea around that, how do we take our grandiose idea and strip it down to the least I can do, or the least I can build to actually validate that idea. And then finally, once we put something out there, we're going to get tons of feedback. And how do you kind of filter that feedback? I think these three things are really powerful challenges, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's pretty universal. So I'm excited to be on the path toward helping people solve those challenges more effectively, because they're so common. And I mean, there's really nothing like having that aha moment where you realize you just saved 6 months of time.
Absolutely. I mean, opportunity cost is everything at this point.
Oh, yeah.
So I think you mentioned briefly about lean startup in this conversation.
Yes.
So I want to kind of go a little bit deeper into that. And of course, lean startup, in my opinion, has a profound impact on how I do validation of my riskiest assumption and how a lot of companies do that. But every now and then I kind of run into situations where I feel maybe we're getting too prescriptive about the whole lean startup thing. I mean, what's your take? Do you see drawbacks with how we are going with the whole lean startup approach?
Well, I think like any approach, it can be, or like any tool, it can be wielded effectively and it can be wielded ineffectively. I think one of the challenges that people have is exactly what you hinted at, which is customizing it to their situation. Some people take something that's not meant to be prescriptive and they apply it in a prescriptive way. A really good example is the idea of a fake landing page. We can talk about that more later. A fake landing page can be a really powerful tool. A fake landing page can help you test your marketing message. A fake landing page can help you know whether or not you should, you can do an A/B test and find out whether this tagline or this tagline resonates more. Fake landing page can let you sort of see who on the open internet might be interested. None of that has anything to do with testing your fundamental core value prop of your product. Like, you're not testing your product experience at all by doing that. So one of the drawbacks I see sometimes is somebody who really needs to test the core product experience, or test the validity of their tech, or test some other fundamental assumption, just says, well, I'm going to build a fake landing page and that's all I need to, I know what to do for an MVP. So, that's often not the right thing to do, but people have read somewhere that Eric Ries said to build a fake landing page, and then they see that there's 10 companies that sprung up that'll build you a fake landing page. And they go, well, that must be the way to do it, when in fact, those companies are just jumping on a bandwagon. They don't know anything. They don't know, they don't know. They are just saying, hey, there's people who will buy this, right? And then at other times, that's exactly the right thing to do, but it depends on your situation. So that's one issue I see with lean startup. I think there's people, a lot of people get the iteration part, but they don't understand how to meld that with a strong vision, and how to take customer feedback in and iterate it within, your vision and your team's unfair advantage, and, really important things for product design. So I think that the great gift of lean startup is that it provides a shared language that many of us can use to discuss concepts that frankly existed long before lean startup. I mean, to me, a lot of the way I learned to do game design is a lot of early prototyping, early iteration, scoping, you know, a lot of the stuff that lean startup sort of discovered and said, wow, look what you can do. You know, many of us in game design scoffed and said, oh, this is silly. He's got new words for what we've always known was really a smart best practice, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it got popularized, and people in the C-suite and people at the New York Times and Disney and in Europe and in Asia and in India and everywhere can get these concepts and then have this shared language and say, no, you know, and say, okay, let's look strategically. Which of these makes sense for us? And so I really think the big disadvantage of lean startup isn't in the core concepts, which are very strong. I think it's in how they're applied and the extent to which somebody applies them and tweaks them to make sense for their situation. And I think that's the way they're always meant to be applied. And so that's what part of what I'm doing. I'm not jumping on the lean startup bandwagon, but I embrace the lean startup terminology, and I provide a series of shortcuts and a step-by-step method that embraces that, but is its own methodology for getting from point A to point B quickly and step-by-step. The other thing missing from a lot of lean startup, particularly from Eric Ries's original book, is just a how-to. It's like, here's what you should do, but how exactly do you do it? And that's part of why I think you see, you know, 10 companies that build fake landing pages, is there's a gap. And that's part of why you see me doing what I'm doing is, you know, okay, great. Now that we get the concept, you know, how do you actually apply it? How do you actually apply it in a smart way? So I think that's really what's next.
Awesome. Like the reason I asked that question is that I often find a lot of companies in hindsight say, oh, we did this lean startup, this was an MVP, we did this, and you know, hey, but this doesn't make sense. I mean, you're saying, oh no, that was an MVP, and so that's where I think there's a lot of confusion that people kind of try to fit this in retrospective or as a justification for why they did something. But is that really the thinking behind their actions? Is sometimes I wonder, and that's something I have personally experienced myself as well. You know, I try to justify why we did something, why we put our mini version of our app on the App Store. It's like, oh, we wanted to validate this. But and this was our MVP, but sometimes it was not. It was just like we went with a gut feeling, and then we found words to kind of put in. Anyway, that's
it's funny because a friend of mine from the game industry, her nickname for MVP is CYA, which stands for cover your the A word. Right. Cover your tuchus, as my people say. That's a Yiddish word. Yeah, I mean, you know, for that, I don't have very much to say about it. I'm a very solution-focused person. So sure, I've seen people do that. Sure, I've done that. Here's the thing. Learn from it, right? If you do that, learn from it. I think a big part of what Lean Startup embraces is, as they call it, validated learning. And a lot of that is be really clear about what it is you're trying to learn from your experiment. And this goes back to my background in science. It's if you're going to run a useful experiment and you're not just, you know, bullshitting your funding agency because they need to see certain results, which, by the way, I've definitely seen in my time working in science. If you're actually trying to learn something from your experiment, step one is have a really clear hypothesis that you're testing. You know, your hypothesis might be that this feature that you're going to ship is not enough, and you release it to people and you wait to see if they complain. That, you know, or your hypothesis could be that a really specific group of people will find this indispensable, or your hypothesis, you know, might be that people will like it but they won't pay for it. You know, what makes you really accelerate toward product market fit using lean startup methods is when you have a really, really crisp, clear hypothesis about why you're testing this particular MVP with these particular people. What is it you're trying to learn? And the clearer you are about that, the better everything goes. You can make a lot of mistakes, but if you're clear about that, you'll still get some great learning. And I've seen that a lot. I mean, I make so many mistakes. And the mistakes can lead you to feel like you wasted your time, but there's certain things that make you more resilient to mistakes. And one of them is having a really clear hypothesis.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of, at least for me personally, has been a real struggle, is how do you define clear hypothesis? And once you actually have what you think is a clear hypothesis, how do you actually design an experiment to validate whether your hypothesis holds good or not? And I'm looking for any quick tips you might have, even just a teaser here, so we can kind of then go into details during your workshop. But any kind of quick tips you have on how should one go about designing an experiment to validate that hypothesis?
So that's exactly what we're going to cover in the workshop. I've developed a specialized canvas called the MVP canvas that's specifically to help you do this. And it's the first unit in everything I do, is giving you a tool to help you design your experiment. So basically what you do, whether you use my methods or anyone else's, is you write down. It's pretty straightforward. To design a good experiment, you start by writing down your current hypotheses about your product value, your customers, who you think they are, why your solution is actually meeting what unmet need they have that your solution meets. It's all these questions that I ask in my canvas, but they're pretty basic. What your unfair advantage is, why your team, why should you solve this? What kind of metrics you're going to use to measure success. And you ask yourself these really fundamental questions, and you write everything down that is your strategy for what you're doing, as if it was a hypothesis. So you say, what's my customer hypothesis? So for example, I have a client right now. In fact, yesterday, that client had a really big breakthrough in her process. We've been working, I think it's like week 5 in our process.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah, and it was really exciting because it really told me how well the process is working for her. So at the beginning of I'm not going to say who it is, it's private, but I can tell you in general, it's higher education. She's developing a system that has mentoring and some other things in it for community college students from disadvantaged background to increase completion rates, to help them actually complete college and get a job and lift themselves up. So it's a great project. And so who is her audience? And the key thing when you're doing early innovation is you don't want to say who's my big audience, who's my mainstream audience, who's my eventual audience. You want to get extremely specific and say, who are the first 25 to 50 people that are the early adopter customers for this, that need this yesterday, and whose pain point for what I'm building is so great that they would go through friction and they would pay and they would use something that was half broken just to get a little piece of their problem solved. Those early adopters, those are who you want to find. Those are who you want to make a hypothesis around, and those are who you want to test your project with first. And that's actually something almost nobody gets right, and they waste a lot of time. Some people do get it right. The best game designers I've ever worked with, they all get it right. Frankly, some of the best product designers I've worked with, they get that right too. So it's one of the patterns I've noticed from the really massive hits that I've worked on. And if you go look at my resume, you'll see I've worked on 6 or 7 massive breakthrough hits. They all got this particular thing right. Very interesting for me. They all could figure out how to find that early, small, tweaky, passionate customer base to get started with.
Yeah. That's pretty awesome, and I'm really looking forward to the workshop where we can dive into more details about this.
one
Sorry.
thing, let me just close that off. So to make a good experiment, you frame all of that. You frame who your customers are, what your solution is, what their unmet need is, what your value prop as hypotheses. And then you prioritize all those hypotheses and you pick the highest risk ones to test first. What you want to do is test the thing that if it wasn't true, your whole project crumbles and doesn't make sense. If your project is dependent on a particular technology, if your project is dependent on really hitting particular customers right, you know, in their wallets, you got to test that really early. Because if that doesn't turn out to be true, you have to pivot or tweak or maybe even drop the project. And so that's, you know, how do you do a good experiment? You figure out what you need to test early, what your highest risk factors, constraints, and hypotheses are. And then you design something to test that.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's what I have been trying to practice. And honestly, it's kind of, when you start off, it's very vague and you kind of go in all directions. But I think once you kind of practice it enough, you know, and you've spent enough time, maybe a week or so, things start kind of falling in place. And a lot of early customer validations that you do, like MVP hacks and stuff like that, to really get to crystallize your hypothesis itself. Like, you know, I think, at least for me, I've gone from vague hypothesis to kind of getting to clearer hypothesis, and it itself is an iterative process. And that's why I think you know, a lot of us kind of feel a bit lost when we start, but as we go in, you know, suddenly clarity emerges from that.
Absolutely, that's a great point. That it's iterative, and so the whole point isn't to be perfect. The whole point is to get started, and then keep iterating.
Yeah, I often say perfection is the enemy of the good, kind of thing, right? It's just like
It's
trying to be perfect right away, and we struggle through it and we get disappointed. And that's something as entrepreneurs we all learn, that, you know, it's not about coming up with the perfect solution day one. It's about getting something good enough and validating your kind of core loop. In some sense. Actually, that, you know, I want to jump to the next question, because that kind of gets into this. Is, you talked a little bit about the core loop earlier on, and I know as a game designer, you know, how important that is to figure out what the core loop is.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit of this kind of a game design thinking comes in and helps entrepreneurs to discover their products, and how core loops help. In fact, what even core loop is, maybe.
Well, a core loop is a concept that describes the interlocking activities and feedback systems of the heart of your player experience. So not the onboarding, not the mastery systems, the engaging activity that's at the heart of the whole experience is the base of a core loop. That the term gets used in different ways in gaming. What I've done is created a simplified simplified model to help people get started creating a core loop. And you can think of it as your day 21 experience. You know, what is the day 21 experience? You know, when someone's learned the ropes, they've kind of figured out if it's for them or not, and now they're just using your product. What is that day 21 experience? In a game like Clash of Clans, it's gonna have, you know, you're building up your armies, and then you might attack your neighbor to gain territory, and then they might take revenge on you. So there's this sort of, you know, earn, build, spend, attack, rebuild, spend, build, core loop, with just a few verbs like build, spend, attack. Those would be like the core verbs in that kind of a experience. But you can also look at a product as a core loop. So let's take Kickstarter as an example. Kickstarter is a crowdfunding platform that hopefully you're familiar with. And so Kickstarter has a core loop, which is, you know, what is the sort of typical experience of a Kickstarter participant? Well, in Kickstarter, it's an ecosystem. So there's, you know, providers and consumers. So there's people that put on campaign looking for money, and then there's the people that would look at their campaign, browse it, watch their video, and then hopefully give them money. So if you look at the core loop of someone who gives Kickstarter money, it's, you see a social media update, you click on the update, that's the trigger. And then you watch a video for a campaign, you might look at the stats, see how many people have contributed, look at the comments page. So you're basically reading and watching the campaign's, story. You're absorbing the story of the campaign. And then you either give money or you might share the campaign if you like it, but you're not ready to give money. And that's where you actually do something, you engage and you get invested. And then the first thing after you give money they ask you to do is share it on social media. And that's the end of the loop. So it's like your trigger is, I read about this on social media, or maybe you got an email from someone. And you go through the loop of viewing and consuming and then giving, donating. And then you share, oh, I just donated to this campaign on social media because they asked you to. And then that becomes the trigger for the next person. That's a really simple core loop that's got all the elements of a gaming core loop, which is an engaging activity, a feedback system, a call to action, and a core investment system that gets you more, that's designed to get you more involved. So that's basically what a core loop is. It's somewhat similar to what you might have heard of as a habit loop from the book The Power of Habit, or from Neerial's Hooked Work. Key difference. A habit loop, both of those books are really describing an operant conditioning behavioral modification loop where there's a trigger, but then what you're doing is rewarding small, even not very meaningful actions in order to shape behavior. And that's behavior mod. The difference between a gaming style core loop that I teach and that is that a gaming style core loop is designed around skill building. It's not designed to manipulate behavior. It's designed to level up your customers' skills. And so it's just a little piece of the system that you need to level up your customers' skills. But it forces you to really strip. It's really useful for building MVPs. So you say, well, what does this have to do with building a better product? What does this have to do with focusing your product? If you focus on finding the nugget of utility or joy or delight in your core loop, by definition, you're going to ignore a lot of things. A lot of things go into phase 2 and phase 3 buckets when that's what you're doing. That's why game designers bring their games to life this way. So a core loop isn't just a gaming concept. It's actually the way that the smartest game designers operationally bring their products to life. They don't start with a bunch of levels. They never start with game mechanics. They start with getting the core loop working and then iterating it till it's really singing. That's where they start. If you get that right, everything else is easy to build in comparison. That's
brilliant. I think this is something that I have at least got influenced by watching some of your videos in the past. And anytime I think about a product, there's just a lot of stuff that comes to your mind. You want to do this. This will be cool. This will be fancy. This will be awesome. This will be epic. And then he's like, okay, what's the core loop here, right? What's the bare minimum cycle that'll get this? And you kind of, the moment you start thinking from that point of view, a lot of clutter goes away. And I think you end up with, the real MVP in some sense that validates your core hypothesis. And I think you can have different kinds of core loops for and correct me if I'm wrong, but you can have different kinds of core loop for value hypothesis versus growth hypothesis. I mean, you can have a different kind of core loop for that.
Absolutely. And if you've got an ecosystem of any kind, you've got multiple core loops that the different players are engaging in. So it's a flexible concept. Just like with MVP, you really have to interpret it. But I think the key thing is that there's an engaging activity of some kind, some pleasurable activity at the heart of it. And then there's a feedback system of some kind that lets the player know, the user, the customer, know if they're on the right track, if they're getting better at something. You can't get better at something without feedback. You can get better at something without a bunch of progress metrics, but you can't get better at something without feedback.
Yeah. And I think Twitter is a great example where they have the core loop implemented in some sense. And do you want to spend just a quick minute explaining what's the core loop of Twitter? I think that's an example a lot of people can relate.
Sure, it's very similar to the core loop of Facebook, although Twitter has clear stats. So Twitter is a great example of something. Well, first of all, let's talk about what you're getting better at in the Twitter core loop, because that really helps focus everything. That's like the strategy. So the thing you're actually getting better at in the Twitter's core loop is you're getting better at expressing yourself coherently in 140 characters, right?
Yeah.
Haven't we all gotten better at that? And you learn what works, you learn how to phrase it, you learn what things get a reaction, what things don't. All the reaction you get on Twitter is social reaction. Other people react to it, they like it, they retweet it, etc. So in Twitter, your internal trigger, a good core loop starts with an internal trigger, you don't want to be dependent on external triggers. You want there to be some emotion. And the internal trigger is, you're either bored or you're between projects or you're procrastinating or you just woke up and you want a quick hit of social interaction or, social news. People use it in different ways, but that's basically it. So for me, Twitter's like my water cooler. When I get done with one project and I have another one to go, I'll go check Twitter, typical. So then your engaging activity is reading and responding to tweets. You see what's in your timeline, you look at your notifications, blah, blah, blah. That's what you're doing. You're reading and responding to tweets. You also might check your stats. That's another thing. But checking your stats doesn't get interesting until you start sharing. Some people on Twitter don't check their stats because they're just lurking. They're just reading, right? They don't necessarily have interesting stats. Once you start sharing content and building up your followers, checking your stats becomes much more interesting. And we call that an engaged trigger. A trigger that, ooh, I want to check my stats. Ooh, I tweeted something controversial last night before I went to bed. Ooh, I can't wait to see if anybody reacted. That's called an engaged trigger. That only happens when someone's engaged. So it's a special kind of trigger. And so Twitter's got a core loop like that. But the core thing is, you're bored, or you want to read some stuff. You check your tweets, you check your stats. And the feedback is social. Did anybody respond to the things that or did any of my friends, do anything interesting? And then the investment system, which is part of a core loop, is building up your followers and getting people to respond. That's the investment system. And, at this point, there's a lot of people that have a lot of followers, but I've got like 13.1 thousand followers. And that makes it a lot harder for me to walk away from Twitter as a platform because I've invested. So even though it's so simple, it actually has all of the hooks of a classic core loop.
So would you say the MVP has to address each of these, else you would not have a real...
No, absolutely not. A lot of MVPs don't have any investment system engaged in them, for instance. No, the core loop is a model to build a compelling experience that drives re-engagement through skill building. But a lot of core loops might be an engaging activity and a rudimentary feedback system, and that's kind of all. But what the core loop model helps you do is think about your most atomic activity that you're offering in a particular way where you don't just think of the activity itself, but you think of how it's going to evolve over time. That's what it gets you to think about. But what your MVP should be is a different question. That totally depends on what you're building.
Cool. Awesome. We have a question that's come in from the Q&A, and I think let's quickly take that in line with that. So we have Tathagat Verma here who's asking, Hemi, we often see crossover ideas like building an Uber for schools or Airbnb for hospitals. Ideas that have a footprint beyond an app and require much more heavy lifting to validate the MVP in terms of the time effort. What has been your experience when you have crossover ideas like this?
Well, there's two really different questions there. one of which is crossover ideas. The second of which is validating something that requires you to build out something bigger. So crossover ideas, you know, if there's market need for them, then they're interesting ideas. So a lot of times people ask me, well, what do you think of this idea? What do you think of that idea? I have opinions. You know, I've been designing games and products for 20 years. My opinions matter so much less than your market's opinions. So that's what I do, is I guide people to finding the right market segment to learn from in terms of crossover ideas. How do you mock up an idea? That's the art of the MVP. I mean, that's why I have a lot of people that want to work with me one-on-one, is that I think there's many different ways. There's something called a Wizard of Oz test, where you make something seem like it's automated, but it's actually just people behind the scenes, you know, one-offing things. That's a really common way to test that kind of idea. And there's lots, you know, there's lots of, I'm not going to go into that in detail in my workshop because that's a whole own workshop. But one of the segments in the masterclass that I teach online is, you know, here's 5 different ways to test your idea. Pick the one that's right for you. So I think, you know, with something like Uber for Schools or this or that, how do you test the MVP? You know, there's a lot of iteration toward it, but I can't just like tell, it completely depends on the context of what you're doing. Okay,
Sure.
That's what I can tell you. And you just need to be, the more versed you are in a variety of methods for mocking up something, the better you'll be able to select the right one. It might not even be digital, right? Your MVP. But, you know, before Uber became Uber, it was a black car service, and it was much more specific. So, you know, before Facebook became Facebook, it was just a campus lookbook, you know, with a little bit of a rating system in it. So these things evolve a lot.
Cool. I think that's a pretty good answer. That I think a lot of times these actually depend on the context, but there are lots of different ways you can go about it. And what the market thinks is more important than what someone in the room can think.
Exactly. So I think the tricky thing is figuring out what to build and then who to test it on.
Cool. I think we have one more quick question that I want to get here, and then we might go into a little bit of lightning round and take
Awesome.
one from audience as well. So this one, I think, hopefully will be a quick one. Companies that are practicing customer development, do you think we still need beta testing?
Oh, absolutely. But it depends on the complexity of what you're building, and it depends on how you define beta testing. You know, if you're building an online multiplayer game, you're going to have an alpha test and a beta test and a closed beta and open, because you're dealing with, you know, multiple complex systems that need to be tuned and brought to life and balanced, for instance. So absolutely, you need beta testing. If you're building something really, really simple, your customer development might just kind of smoothly go through beta testing into launch. So I think it just depends on complexity and really how you're using that term.
And I think especially if you have products that have network effects, it becomes more and more important is based on my past experience.
Yes, that's such a good point. And I think, you know, beta testing can mean different things. MVP can mean different things. I like to not get hung up too much on terminology, but I just will say to a client or to a student or to everyone in the workshop room, here's how I'm using this term. Here's our definition for this today. Great, let's move on and talk about how to get your good work done. You know, I've had clients come to me telling me they're in the middle of a beta test, and I would have called it a diary study. Right? You know, people use different terminology for different things.
Yeah, that's one of a huge challenge in this space is we all take the same word but mean very different things.
Yep.
All right. I think I want to jump into a bit of firing round, and how that's going to work is I'm going to shoot at you 2 options, and you need to pick one option. We'll go through all the questions. If time permits, we might revisit and maybe ask why one over the other. But for now, we just kind of go through very quickly, and I give you two options, and you pick one. How does that sound?
Okay, I'm gonna tweak that a little bit, and hopefully it'll be okay.
Okay.
So let's do it.
So the first one is, I mean, there's been a lot of debate, at least for me when I've worked with companies. Should we do personas or should we do jobs to be done? What's your take?
Oh, jobs to be done. And let me tell you why. Personas are great for audience segmentation and marketing. They work really well. That's where they came out of. When what you're trying to do is build an MVP, a stripped down high learning MVP, personas are much less directly useful than jobs to be done if the jobs to be done is deployed correctly. And the reason is jobs to be done can surface specific customer pain points and habits in a way that personas never can.
Cool. Low fidelity prototypes or high fidelity prototypes?
Low fidelity prototypes. The reason is that low fidelity prototypes enable rapid early iteration. They have three key advantages. You have much faster cycles because there's less graphics to tweak and to just deal with. Two, your team gets less emotionally invested in a low fidelity prototype than when they've poured their love into beautiful graphics. And that means that they're more receptive to real market feedback. Three, people are more honest and forthcoming, giving feedback when what they're looking at doesn't look like it's all polished and finished.
Awesome. The last point I think is very powerful. That's very cool. Next one, fake landing pages or go after core loops?
Core loop, for all the reasons I stated above. And I have a game thinking roadmap that explains why. And in fact, you might want to use a fake landing page later in your process to test your marketing message because it's great for that. But if you want to actually bring your product to life, core loop's much more powerful.
Cool. User interviews or play tests?
See, that one's both. It's an ordering thing. If I had to pick, I would do a play test, but I would wrap it in a user interview. So the most effective play tests are three parts. The first part of it's an interview where you're getting some useful info from people, but you're also telling them that they're the expert and setting them up to give you really good feedback and not think that they have to please you. A play test, iterative play tests are how you should bring your product to life. But then the interview can really wrap around and help you also debrief after the play test and get the most out of your play test by having a really smart way to debrief and learn more about what happened in the play test.
Cool. Lean canvas, business model canvas.
So they're both great and there's a lot of overlap. If I was doing an MVP, I'd probably use the lean canvas. I think the business model canvas, if what you're doing is working out your business model, your partnerships, and your revenue streams, then the business model canvas is great. If what you're trying to do is work out how to quickly build an MVP and test product market fit, the lean canvas or my own MVP canvas are a better fit.
Awesome. One last question for me is, how do you define success of a product? Product idea. I mean, how do you define success of a product idea?
So I think it's an ongoing thing. First of all, I think it's important to define what you want. For some people, they define success as this product pitch will get me funded. Some people define success as I can run a lifestyle business off the revenue. People define it in very different ways, okay? But rather than defining product success that way, I want to share with you what I call the alpha moment. And this is a huge part of knowing if you're on the right track, knowing if your idea is worth pursuing. Everybody I coach and work with runs into an alpha moment. The alpha moment happens when you've actually found exactly the right people to give you feedback using my methods or someone else's. Like, you know, these are the right people to give you feedback on your product, and you get them to give you brutally honest feedback. That's your alpha moment. You're going to get three kinds of feedback. You're either going to get oh, this is not very compelling, which is hard, but how much more useful to get that early. You might get, oh my God, when is this shipping? Can I have it yesterday? Which is also very powerful to get, which might mean, oh, I have to quit my day job and pursue this. You know, it's hot. Or you might get lukewarm feedback. Oh, that's a nice, interesting idea. That's interesting. That's lukewarm feedback. And that's your alpha moment. So how do I define product success is when you hit your alpha moment, can you as an entrepreneur do the right thing with that feedback? Do you know what to do with that feedback to move forward? If so, then you're on the path to product success.
Awesome. So I want to look for my alpha moment now. Cool. I think I'm done with most of my questions. We have one other question that's come in from Lakshmikant. And Lakshmikant is asking, what will be the impact of virtual reality on products to come in the near future?
So I personally think that augmented reality will be far bigger than virtual reality. I think virtual reality will remain niche for a long time because of the social aspects. I've also been through a couple of virtual reality hype cycles already. So what I'm seeing now is not the first time I've seen all this hype. I think it'll be great for gaming. I think there'll be some great uses for you know, remote collaboration or maybe remote surgery or whatever. But I think that people want to be with other people in the physical world, and virtual reality, you know, means that you're wearing a computer on your face. And I think for a lot of people, particularly women, it's just not that appealing to wear a computer on their face. So that's my take. I think it'll be niche and I think it'll be great. But people that think everything's going to be virtual reality, we're going to have all our meetings in virtual reality, have drunken the Kool-Aid. And talk to me in 10 years and we'll see if that's true.
So I think what you're saying is augmented reality maybe has a bigger scope than virtual reality.
I think so. That's where I'm putting my bets.
Cool. I think we're done with all the questions, and it's been pretty awesome having this conversation with you, Amy. Lots of interesting learning, and more importantly, kind of excited to have you come down to India and meet you face to face for the first time. I mean, that will be, you know, what I'm really looking forward for.
I can't wait. I'm so excited.
Is there any you want to leave the audience with, you know, that you think like thought of the day or something on top of your mind that you think, you know, something people should go and think about?
I would say just really think about getting yourself ready to eagerly hear brutally honest feedback on your idea as early as possible. It's really emotionally difficult. I know that for myself and for the people I work with. But the more that you can embrace that reality and put your ego aside and really be in a mindset where you want to just absorb and listen to and learn from, you know, real market feedback from your earliest customers. I think that mindset is the thing that will take you right through your alpha moment towards success. And it's the thing I've seen the most that differentiates successful entrepreneurs from wannabes.
Awesome. Honest feedback is the way to go. Cool.
From the right people.
From the right people, of course, from your alpha moment. Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate you taking this time and look forward to meeting you soon in India.
Me too. I hope to see many of you at the workshop and at the Agile India conference. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.